I'm going to need some more coffee for this one. Ooh, hot. Still hot. All right. Um, this one's going to be a tough one, guys. So Stalin was not a great person either. Um, his rule was very rough, to say the least. Um, Before we get into that, there are a few things that we need to go over. If you're looking at the Prezi, let me address the first couple things on the list. First, the hammer and sickle flag. Hammer and sickle flag became the symbol for the Soviet Union, Soviet Russia. The hammer represents the industrial workers. The sickle represents the agricultural workers, the farmers. Those were the building stones of the revolution. Those are the building stones of Soviet Russia. So they're represented and remembered in their flag as such. KGB. KGB was the kind of like a combination of Russia's secret service with the stereotypes for a country's secret police you read in those sci-fi books. KGB was very terrifying. They were very much in charge of spying and information gathering both outside of Russia as well as inside of Russia. Stalin took advantage of this greatly and used the KGB quite a lot. And the KGB had just ruthless tactics, which was very much promoted by Stalin. All right. The third thing on the list, before we start going into some more of the nitty-gritty things, we have religion. Stalin banned religion. Religion has no place in communism. We have no place for it here. We don't need to be reading about things like charity and goodwill to others. Everyone has what we want. We're in a great society. This, of course, was not true, but that's what he told everyone. Soviet committees and the 5-year plans. There were multiples of these, many 5-year plans, different Soviet committees. These were meant for the betterment of Russia. Some of them were good. A lot of them weren't. Stalin's reign had a lot. He murdered a lot of his own people. He became very totalitarian, very controlling, and even more than anything else, very paranoid. There are many ways you can rule a country. You can rule through loyalty, through love, through kindness. You can still be strict and follow the rules, but Stalin very much chose to lead by fear. We talked about pathos, logos, ethos, kairos. Fear was his primary use out of those 4 things in pathos. He did a lot of brainwashing, a lot of Russian propaganda. Russian propaganda was huge during this time. You grew up hearing that Stalin was great, singing songs about how awesome Stalin was, reading poetry about how great Stalin was. If you see something that talks about how awful Stalin was, such as, Leon Trotsky's writings and texts, that person was most likely going to be disappeared, as was Leon Trotsky, who was assassinated. A lot of people were very scared of him, and in terms of the 5-year plans, he ended up enacting these for a couple reasons. One, he very much wanted to use it for PR. He wanted to tell people, hey, everyone, look at this. Look at all the things we're accomplishing. Look at all these things we're doing. I have these specific 5-year plans. He didn't talk about how they failed or how many of them hurt Russia more than it helped. But hey, the good publicity. PR is public relations. One of the other reasons why he did it was to keep his people busy. The majority of his people became working class, and they were underfed, and they were taken advantage of, and they were overworked. And Stalin began to realize this is a lot of what happened when Tsar Nicholas was in charge. He overworked a lot of people. He did not provide enough food for his people. And the working class ended up revolting and kicking Tsar Nicholas out. I should know because I was one of these people. They're going to be doing that to me. And so he overworked them like crazy. The ideal working class for Stalin was strong, capable of immense work, loyalty. They would be unquestioningly faithful, and dumb. Ideally, they wouldn't be very smart, so they wouldn't know that they were being taken advantage of. And that's very much what he promoted within his working class. If you did not know how to read, you could not understand or you could not read the history of how they were treated before. You could say, when Tsar Nicholas was in charge, you had nothing. Nothing. Look at how much more you have now. We can prove this in historical documents. Look at this math, and look at this graph. Statistically, you guys are a lot happier and better well treated than Tsar Nicholas, than when Tsar Nicholas was in charge. You don't want someone like Tsar Nicholas coming back and taking over, do you? No. And at some point, like, the working class just was not smart enough to dispute any of those facts. So they believed him. And those who were smart enough, those who were questioned, they ended up being disappeared, most likely by the KGB. This led to a few different things. An example of people starting to speak up were the farmers. You would think if anyone would be supported in this, it would be the agricultural workers. You got the sickle on the flag to represent how important they are. Stalin took away a lot of the food, a lot of the eggs, the meat, the grains. He took away all the food from the farmers that they were creating, and they were supposed to redistribute them. But many of the farmers did not get back what they created. But according to the tenets of communism, more food meant we would take your food and we redistribute the food out to everyone. But a lot of the farmers did not get that, and they started starving as they gave up their food. They got very fed up. Like, this is great here. We got plenty. We can keep this. We can sell this. Nope. Stalin takes it. And so they got very upset, and they actually went on strike. They destroyed a lot of their own food. They burned a lot of the grain. They destroyed a lot of the eggs. They did a lot of very specific things to say, if we can't have it, no one can have it. You can't take this. You either let us have some of it, or no one can have it. And Stalin, being the benevolent leader, the kind leader that he is, said, okay, no one can have it then. And he he quarantined them. He didn't allow anyone to come in, didn't allow anyone out, and he starved a lot of them out. They couldn't get more supplies. They couldn't do any kind of business, and many of the farmers ended up dying of starvation, dying of sickness. They couldn't get any help, any medication or doctors. No one was allowed to see them, and they weren't allowed to see anyone else. Eventually, many of them had to um, give in and swear that they would be one with communism again, that we were wrong, and you were right, of course, Stalin. And in the end, he accepted that, but then came the purges, not the movies. Hey, the purges of 1936 to 1938. This was when Stalin killed a lot of his own people. He slaughtered them. Anyone there was any kind of suspicion of, even rumors, they were killed. They were destroyed. At this point, Stalin's paranoia was just absolutely insane. It was anyone on the KGB suspicion list, anyone who was ever reported for any kind of misbehavior, even like a neighbor reporting their neighbor on being, I thought they said something mean about Stalin once. They were just killed. And some of the first people killed were any of Stalin's political rivals, because of course they were traitors. If there was a political rival, you slander them, and in Stalin's case, you end up killing them instead of talking and figuring out a compromise. Next on the chopping block for the purges were those farmers who agreed to work with Stalin after they rebelled and went on strike. The farmers who said that they would start making more food to give to Stalin to redistribute. They were next to be killed. And then anyone for the slightest reason. So many people that Stalin was supposed to be taking care of and responsible for were just destroyed. Let me get a number. Hold on. Okay, got a few numbers for you. So during the Great Purges of 1936 to 1938, historians estimate the total number of deaths due to Stalinist repression in 1937 to 1938 would be between 680,000 to 1,200,000. That's just the tip of the iceberg, though. During Stalin's reign overall, there's no exact estimation to how many of his own people died, but some historians estimated numbers killed by the Stalin's regime to be 20 million or higher. Almost 800,000 executions alone. Just executions. 1.7 million deaths in the Gulag, labor camps. There were just so many awful, terrifying numbers. The deaths of at least 5.5 to 6.5 million people in the famine of 1932 to 1933. His rule was bloody. His rule was terrifying. And a lot of people were killed, especially many people who were opponents of his, and many people who had nothing to do with any of the bad things that were happening, who were ignorant of Stalin doing these awful things, just because Stalin was very paranoid. Stalin took over for a man, Tsar Nicholas, who was not meant to rule. Tsar Nicholas did not want to rule, and it became apparent the way he did that. He did not provide for his people. Many of his own people starved. He led to a lot of his own people's deaths. Stalin ended up turning a lot like Tsar Nicholas. He very much became not just like Tsar Nicholas, but even worse. He killed so many more of his own people. He did these awful, awful things. And in the end, his paranoia just went out over him. If there's any story, real life story that's symbolic of power corrupts and of turning into what you hate, Stalin is it. So, yeah, like I said, this was going to be a tough one. This is definitely probably going to be the longest ones in this list. Usually in this class around this time, one of the students goes, "Mr. Schwartz, that's dumb." I'm like, what do you mean that's dumb? There are more people than there is Stalin. Why didn't they say something? Like, if I was put in this situation, I would have said something. This leads us to our next point. In our next slide on Prezi, we're going to talk about not just how Stalin ran the country, but how he got everyone to follow him. And that'll be the next slide. If you've been watching all these videos in order in one day, this might be a good time to take a break, take a breather, have a coffee. This one was rough, but next one's not going to be too much better. But this one in particular was a hard one. Going over the purges in particular, it's a tough one. But if you want to know more, which you guys should, we're in education. We strive for knowledge. You're in my pre-AP classes. Please open up the other students' research over the Hammer and Sickle Flag, KGB, religion, the Soviet committees and the 5-year plans, and the purges. Thank you everyone for listening. Have a great day. Do good things.